In Our Voices is made possible in part by the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, taking a stand for humanity by remembering the past and committing to the future.
I was born in Czechoslovakia. I remember it as a wonderful small town. We lived 7 kilometers next to a very modern big city, and I remember my neighbors well. I remember our church. I remember our synagogue. I came from a normal Jewish family. I had 2 younger brothers, and my mother, an extended family, as we all do, aunts and uncles and so forth. We all lived in peace with our neighbors. I never knew that I was different from our neighbors who were not Jewish. They would go to church on Sundays. We would go to synagogue on Shabbat, or whatever the holidays were, until we heard the rumble about Hitler coming into power in Germany. We began to live in fear. Most of my friends were not Jewish. So I remember having a friend sleep at my house, sleep in the same bed with me, getting up in the morning to go to school. Came to school, a man teacher stood at the door, allowed my friend to walk into class, my friend who was not Jewish, held his hand up to me, and all the Jewish children in our community at that point were sent home from school. The Jewish children were not allowed to go to school any longer. This is the first where I felt different. This is the first where I realized what it was like to be a Jew and to have someone really show hatred towards you for no reason but because of my religion. I remember coming home. My 2 younger brothers were sitting there with my mother. I remember her sitting in front of a fireplace in a chair with tears in her eyes and telling us there are new rules we had to follow. First was all the Jews in our community, and we now know all through Europe, had to be identified. In our particular case, it was to wear a yellow star. The yellow star needed to be sewed on in the front and in the back. If you walked out and you were caught without the yellow star, you were being punished or worse. Little by little, our businesses were being taken away. We were farmers. We heard during the night when they came to take our livestock and our chickens. Chickens make a lot of noise when you go to catch them. We had to sit quietly in our home, locked up, hoping they were not going to hurt us. Let them take whatever they want. Don't hurt us. And so this is how we lived for a short while, totally isolated from our neighbors, but we still lived in freedom, so we thought. Until one night, there was a knock on our door. My mother is standing there with her 3 children around her, and she was told to take warm clothes, to take her valuables, to take pots and pans, to take whatever food we had, and to march outside. After many hours, they took us what was known as a ghetto area. It was a small school in our own community that was converted as a ghetto. They put a fence around this, they brought dogs, they brought soldiers with guns, and we are now inside this ghetto area. Our neighbors, our friends, stood on the other side by the fence, looking at us and laughing at us. To this day, I don't understand that. You need to know that we knew nothing at that point about Auschwitz, about a concentration camp, or anything else. They told us we were going to be relocated. They lied, and we believed. They now take us to this station, and we're all there with our bundles. This very long train comes and stops, and we are loaded into one of the boxcars. The door closes and the lock goes on. This is the first that we know wherever we're going to be taken to is not going to be a good relocation. You know, we're here in the Holocaust Museum. We have a boxcar here. A boxcar like the one that took the Jews to the concentration camps. I can walk through this museum all day long, and I can talk about everything that has happened to me and about the artifacts that are in this museum. The hardest for me is to speak about this ride. And so this train keeps going and going. The train stops, and it comes to a place called Auschwitz. You are greeted by soldiers standing and holding a gun pointed at you. There are also two men standing in front of each compartment. They're dirty, skinny, head shaved, wearing uniforms. These were Jews that were brought there before us. So they come on and they watch, and as they see children, they keep whispering in Yiddish, in Jewish, "You're 15. Remember, when you get off, you're 15. I'm 13 years old, not quite 13, and I hear a man whispering that I'm 15 when I get off. I didn't know it at the time, but that man saved my life by telling me to say I am 15, or I would have gone with the children and gone directly to the gas chambers. So my mother and I are in line, and then they call age again. And I told my mother she was in the wrong line. And so she left me and went into the next line and marched away. When I asked several hours later when I would see my mother, they showed me the smoke. I can't believe I'm back here. It's a total nightmare for me. I am seeing the people inside the rail car. I'm seeing the pregnant women. I'm seeing the mothers holding babies. I'm seeing them begging for water. I'm seeing the entire nightmare. I'm seeing the bucket in the middle of this rail car that needed to be used for toilet. I am seeing people standing in it. I'm smelling it. I'm smelling it totally. It's an unbelievable sight. The gate, the lookout posts, and every minute what was going on in this camp that one cannot forget. My first memory is sitting in a straight chair and having my hair shaved. I remember, and I can still feel the hair and my tears mingling on my face. There is no way anybody could possibly tell the story of Birkenau. There could have been 50 people standing in the same spot today, and each one of us saw something else happening. Each one of us had a different experience. as they shaved my head. They handed me a pair of clogs and a uniform and pushed me outside. And I walked outside into a snake pit, a total snake pit. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of dirty, skinny, uniformed, head-shaved women staring at us that had just come in. And a lady walked up to me, so very skinny and dirty, and kept staring at me. It turned out she was my mother's youngest sister. She's the one, the second person coming in that saved my life. She's the one that probably gave up her bread for a week to be able to take me into her barracks and onto her bunk bed and tell me what to do and what not to do, how to behave and how not to behave. And every single night, as I would cry myself to sleep, she put her arms around me and kept whispering, "Tomorrow will be better. You will see. Tomorrow will be better." There's no way that any survivor can stand and describe a day in Auschwitz. How do you talk about hunger? What is hunger? Is it skipping breakfast, lunch, dinner, dieting? Maybe you haven't eaten in a day. Hunger is where you would sell your soul for a piece of bread or a potato. We would sell whatever we could, including our soul, to get that piece of bread, to live with the gas chambers, to know and to see the trains and the people coming in and day out, and watching them walk to the gas chambers. This is how we lived in Auschwitz. One day they came to empty out our cabin, and we knew we were going to the gas chambers. At that point, we were so hungry and so beaten down. Before we went in, they had a selection. My aunt was chosen to go onto a truck to be taken somewhere else as she watched me walk towards the gas chambers. The last minute, 6 of us were pulled out of line and taken onto a truck to be taken to a factory to do slave labor. While I worked in this factory, I was the youngest. I had 599 mothers because none of us thought that we would survive. None of us thought that the world would even believe of what humanity can do to humanity. The cruelties, the hunger, the beatings that were going on in the gas chambers. And so 599 women shared their crumbs of bread with me. Every single night, each one would put a crumb of bread into my hand. In turn, I promised that if I survived, I would tell the world what happened. Being the youngest, hope was on my side. When Germany started to lose the war, they didn't know what to do with the prisoners anymore. And so at this point, what they did is they put us what is known as the Death March. They put us on the road. We were hungry, we were sick, we had clogs on our feet, we didn't have warm clothes. Some of us had a little blanket, and they put us on the road, and it's cold, and there's still wet, and there's still snow. And so they would march us from one area to another because they didn't know what to do with us at that point, the Germans. They would march us through a town, and of course we were uniformed and hungry and starving, and we were begging for food as we marched through the towns. The doors would lock, the shades would come down, Every so often, there was a human being that would open a door or a window and throw out a loaf of bread or throw out potatoes. We would pounce on this food because we were so hungry. They would shoot at us, we didn't care anymore, and the streets were literally left full of bodies. In the towns that we walked through, people died from dysentery, from hunger, from thirst, from illness, and the streets were literally full of bodies. And so at this point, they would take us into the fields. They put us in the field where we slept in the field, open field, and we were begging and hoping for food. And I remember we went to sleep and we woke up in the morning and we were surrounded by the Russian army. And so they were the liberators for us. When you're first liberated, the first thought is food. And then you think about what happened, and then you think about your family. Do you remember 9/11? Who can ever forget of what happened here during 9/11? And if you remember the day after, some people were not found because of what happened. And they were putting notes, have you seen so-and-so in New York and other areas? That made me think. We would put up notes asking, have you seen so-and-so? Do you know this and this name? And people tried to connect, and it took years for people to find each other. I knew my mother walked to the gas chambers. I knew that immediately because she was in the line that walked to the gas chambers. My brothers, I know they did not survive. When I first came home after being liberated, I was the first one in our community, the first Jew to come back in our community. And I came back thinking that our house was still there and I would move into our home and hoping that someone from my family survived. So I came back. The house was at that point torn down. My grandmother's house still stood. And so I moved into my grandmother's house. The neighbors knew I was back. They saw me. Nobody. This is what I don't understand. These were our friends. These were our neighbors. These were people we knew, we lived with. Nobody came and said, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? It was like I was this non-existent person that came back. This is how I lived, and I used to go every day to the train station to wait for the train that came by once or twice a day and wait for the train, hoping somebody would come back. Little by little, one person came back from this family, one person came back from that family. They had no home, they had no food, and like me, had nothing and no one. So everybody moved in and lived with me in my grandmother's house. We had commune living at that point, and all of us would see and run to meet a train to see if somebody else had survived. My dad, who was in this country, wrote letters to the neighbors, to whomever he could remember, looking for his family. The letters were never given to me. I knew he was in America, I knew it was Chicago, but I didn't have an address. He worked for Vienna Sausage Company during the Depression years. He had all intentions of bringing his family here. We had our papers to immigrate to this country, but they wouldn't let us out because its madness started and we got caught in its madness. And so finally, he called the small post office that was there. He got in touch with the post office. The postman came and told me if I was at the post office tomorrow morning at such and such a day, I would get a call from America. I came to the post office. All the neighbors came to listen to my conversation with my dad. And I thought I had to shout so he could hear me across the ocean. And so I was able to get papers to leave my hometown. And so I came here to my dad. It was important for me to live a normal life, to become a normal teenager and put the past behind me. I took all my memories and put them on the bottom of my brain, never to be taken out, never to be examined, so I thought. This is how I lived. I just had to go to school, I had to learn the language, I had to do whatever needed to be done, but not think about the past. The past happened to 6 million other people, 6 million simply because we were born Jewish. And so for many years, I couldn't and wouldn't speak about my past until I became a grandmother. My son came to me and said, "Mom, you need to do this because I need to know." The children were not taught about the Holocaust in the schools in those days because the teachers didn't know how to approach the subject matter. And so not much was taught in the public schools or in high school or even in college in those days. My son, whatever he would get was in Hebrew school or Sunday school. And so he would come home and ask questions, and I kept saying, "We're not going to talk about this. I don't want to talk about it." And so after a while, he learned not to ask. Then one day he came to me and he said, "Mom, you need to go and have a recording done at the Holocaust Museum. Don't ask for anything, sign whatever they want you to sign, but take a blank tape and ask for a copy of the tape because I need to know, and your grandchildren will need to know." And so this is where I went and had my story recorded for the first time.
Did you talk to your son when he was growing up? When did you start talking about your experiences?
Well, my son always knew. I did talk about the fact that I was in a concentration camp. He knew I was in a concentration camp. He did not know all of my experiences, as no one really does up until this point, because, as I said, it's this hidden little box, and that's the way I cope with it. If he would ask me something, I would tell him. If he would read about it, I would say, yes, it happened. But I never really sat down and told him the entire story. And I think it's wrong. I think our young people should be educated to it. I think it should be talked about, it should be written, and I know there are very dedicated people and they do all of these things. Unfortunately, I did not, and I admit I was wrong. But yes, it should be done, and yes, everyone should remember what happened.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, only, dear God, please don't forget and don't let it happen again.
Thank you very much.
And I remember walking out, and I had a friend go with me, walking into the car and sitting down, and this is where the floodgates opened in that car. This is where I became the survivor. This is where I realized what I needed to do. This is where I realized that this is why those women were giving me their crumbs of bread, so that I would stand up and I would speak out. Only through teaching, only by telling our story, only by getting the children and the young people and as adults who think they know what has happened, who really don't. They need to hear our stories. We know what is going on in the world today. We hear it. We are trying to teach of what happened to us yesterday, so it doesn't happen to your children or your children's children tomorrow. But we haven't learned much about the past. We have not learned much from the Holocaust. We know what is going on through the world, and we all stand up and say, well, what can I do? So I say, what can I do? And I sit back and I don't do anything. But I think that if I do, and you do, and you do, and you do, and we all have one voice, maybe we can all make a better world. Thank you.
In Our Voices is made possible in part by the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, taking a stand for humanity by remembering the past and committing to the future.